Hello and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the CJJA Code of Practice for Harm and Violence Prevention webinar. Today, we're focusing on behavioral intervention strategies for juvenile justice systems. My name is Mike Dempsey, and I'm the Executive Director for the Council of Juvenile Justice Administrators. For those of you who might be new to CJJA, we are a national nonprofit organization formed in 1994 to improve juvenile justice systems, local secure correctional and detention centers, services, programs, and most importantly, the long-term outcomes for youth entrusted to our care. CJJA represents the youth juvenile justice system CEOs of all 50 states and various metropolitan counties across the country. I want to start out today by thanking and recognizing the CJJA members, our associate members, and partner organizations who have committed really a great deal of time working on this project over the last year or so. They put an awful lot of time and energy into creating the position paper and the standards that we're going to discuss on today's webinar. I want to also thank Tim Gills, who is the Senior Vice President for MANT Systems, who will also be moderating today's call. And Tim approached me probably close to 2 years ago, I think now, about the issue around the need for establishing standards around physical intervention techniques for juvenile justice systems. And this was actually something that I had given a lot of thought to over the last few years, and the fact that wherever I went into facilities all across the country, I would see different strategies, different trainings, staff being trained differently, different policies, and how to best provide intervention strategies for incidents of violence and various types of youth behaviors. So when Tim talked to me about this, I thought it was absolutely the right thing to do. And I was really thrilled that he came to CJJA to approach us to work on this project, and I was happy to do so. So what we're going to discuss today is kind of the culmination of a couple of years of work with a lot of very great people, some of which are represented on the panel today. But an awful lot of thought and effort has been put into the standards that we're going to discuss. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Charity, who's going to walk us through some housekeeping information real quick, and then we'll turn it over to Tim to moderate the webinar. Charity.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. If you could please use the audio through your phone and use your PIN number. Don't forget to choose the phone call toggle when you choose your audio. Everyone will be muted for the webinar. At any time, please type your questions into the question box, and questions will be answered during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. The webinar is being recorded, and a link to the audio recording and PowerPoint presentation will be sent following the webinar. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Tim Gill.
All right, thank you, Charity. Thank you, Mike. It's my honor to be here today to moderate this discussion. We have an amazing panel that I've had the honor of working alongside with them and others like Joe Mullen Sr. and Reese Peterson, who've been huge in coming to this place of the code of practice. So I just want to introduce the panel today and kind of let you know who is on here. You've met Mike, and Mike Dempsey is the Executive Director of CJJA. Prior to coming to CJJA, Mike was Executive Director for the Indiana Department of Corrections, the Division of Youth Services. And Mike comes to us today with 35 years of experience in the field. Along with Mike is Charles Neff. Chuck is the Director of Juvenile Justice Services in Pennsylvania. And he has had 25 years in both the public and the private sector. Coming to our panel today, it was a big part, both Mike and Chuck on the committee as we went through the last couple of years. Also joining us is Inez Nieves, and Inez is retired, but man, I have gotten to know her over the last couple of years, and her comments and as we've gone through the code of practice have just been invaluable. Prior to retiring here in June, her last role, she was the Deputy Commissioner of the Division of Juvenile Justice for the state of New York, and she comes to us today with 39 years of this experience. And our final panel member today is Penny Sampson. Penny is currently a consultant for CJJA in the capacity of providing technical assistance to state directors, secure treatment facility directors, as well as the staff working with at-risk youth in public, private, both secure and non-secure programs. And Penny comes today with 35 years of experience in the subject matter of that we're going to kind of try to tackle here in the next hour. And I want to thank them all for their time and efforts as we've kind of got ourselves to this point today. Charity, if you can go ahead and move our slide. Mike mentioned the position paper, and you can find the position paper. I believe Stephanie's going to put it in the chat, the website where you can find it on the website, cjja.net. But the position paper really is a culmination of a couple of years worth of work where the code of practice group would get together, we'd meet, we'd wordsmith, we'd put in a lot of time and effort into it. And then a couple times over the last 2 years, we would take it to the broader CJJA group and have them give us input. We broke it out one meeting about a year ago to the regional groups, and then wordsmithed it a little bit more here just in January as we put out the position paper. So we want to kind of take the code of practice, and that code of practice, by the way, is in the handouts, and you can see that as well as some further bios. We have a limited amount of time. I could tell a whole lot more about this amazing panel, but if you want to see more, their bios are in the handouts as well. But I want to go kind of through this bullet point by bullet point. So Charity, if you could move the slide for us, please. So our first bullet point is from under the code of practice is an atmosphere and culture of safety and care can be created by all juvenile justice service organizations. And what I'm going to do as we go through this here the next hour is just hand it off to one of the panel members, and then somebody else may kind of chime in. We have a limited amount of time, so we'll spend only a few minutes on each of them. If you do have any questions, though, we would ask that you ask those questions in the chat area, and then at the end, with the time remaining, we will get to you on those. Chuck, I'm going to ask you to tackle this first one. You were a big part of the committee as we did this. I know you talked a lot about culture and the safety of a culture of the organizations. So if you wouldn't mind, please tackle our first bullet point.
Certainly, Tim. Thank you. We're going to move through these quickly, as Tim said, and I know Inez has a few things she wants to say about this bullet, so I'll try to be brief. I'm going to start with a little bit of a strength-based approach here and just remind everybody of the history of juvenile justice. I can only speak intimately to juvenile justice in Pennsylvania. However, I believe a lot of what I say will resonate with many of you. So I will say that when I started in the early 90s in juvenile justice, I worked with some people who had been there for 20 years already, and they told me stories about juvenile justice, and I was like, wow, I can't believe that you guys did that 20 years ago, and that was in the 90s. As time has gone through my own career, I've looked back and said, you know, even back when I thought I was in a great program, I've looked back and said to myself, we could have done better than that. And I think today we're at a point where we're looking at ourselves and hopefully we're all collectively saying we can still do better. We've come a long way. We've made tons of progress, but I believe that from a culture of safety standpoint, we can do better. I know when I speak for Pennsylvania, I know that we can do better, and we're trying to every day. So I'm going to give you a little example that I give to a lot of my staff in our state-run facilities here in Pennsylvania. I've heard over the years that being an air traffic controller is one of the most difficult jobs in the world, very stressful. And for all of you that fly on a regular basis, I will just say, let's all hope that the airlines don't say, well, we understand that it's a difficult and stressful job, so if you have 2 or 3 planes crash a month or a year, that would be okay with us. They don't say that. We all hope they don't say that, because probably most of us fly from time to time. And I liken that to the juvenile justice realm. This is a very difficult career choice, a very difficult job, but we owe it to our kids, to our staff, to our facilities, to our communities to do this job correctly. And sometimes, and I'm only speaking for Pennsylvania here, sometimes I find myself saying, we might see that as unacceptable, but maybe we don't see it as unacceptable enough. Policies play a big role in our culture, but probably more importantly than policies is the belief in those policies and the strict adherence to those policies. I've probably taken up enough time, so Inez, if you want to touch on anything you want to, feel free.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Chuck. Well said. I wanted to touch on safety because as we created in New York State, when we transformed our system from a correctional model to a more treatment model, safety was one of the major principles. And we knew that, once we established rules and practices for kids, then the staff would say to us, well, that's not safe for staff. How are we going to allow these kids to do, these type of things? And we had to really balance that. But in the end, we really stressed to staff that safety is treatment and treatment is safety. You can't do treatment if people are feeling unsafe in your environments. And one of the issues that I wanted to really touch upon is you can create a safe environment, but you also have to maintain a safe environment. And that's doing formal check-ins with youth and staff, informal check-ins with youth and youth, because as you know, our kids are unpredictable and sometimes things change very quickly. So I think anyone who is creating any type of care system for young people, safety should be at the core. Thank you.
No, excellent points on the safety and the culture of safety. Penny, I'm going to ask you to take the next bullet of our code that says every effort should be made to structure environments and provide behavioral supports for youth with a positive orientation to prevent violence or behaviors posing risk and thus prevent the need for restrictive interventions. How is it that behavior support and positive orientation can reduce our need for restrictive interventions as you see it?
Great, thank you. So I know people think it goes without saying that we need a structured environment for kids, but it is so critical to be trauma informed as we work with kids and staff. We're in a very typically volatile environments. We're having a lot happening within our facilities. There's a lot happening outside the facilities. We have the press, we have advocacy groups, and all these things are going on. And as much as possible, if our facilities have good schedules that are posted and the staff and the kids know what to expect every day, you're going to see the anxiety level go down. And then for the positive orientation, for as long as I've been doing this, I see us fall into this over and over again, where the kids that are acting out are getting all of the attention. And, recent facilities, kids were acting out, so the police would come and then they'd get a ride in an ambulance and the fire truck would come and they were just having a ball. And going around individually speaking with the kids, they said, this is what we have to do to get attention. So I just wanted to use that as an example that if we have a positive orientation and the kids get more attention and more feedback when they're positively interacting, that is what they will do. And if they get all the attention for being negative, that is what we will see. So as simple as it sounds, this is a very important point in being proactive and not reactive with our kids.
Excellent. Excellent job. Charity, if you could move us to the next slide, please. Thank you. Chuck, I'm going to throw this one back to you because I know you've got a passion for it. We spent a couple of years on the committee as this happened, and my passion for trauma-informed programs, no matter where those are, and that's our next bullet point, really talks about the consistent delivery of an organized trauma-informed program that takes into account the gender and culturally knowledgeable with enhanced safety. And again, probably in today's culture today, what we're dealing with more than ever, I mean, it's such a needed kind of understanding. So if you would, kind of give us your insight into this one.
Thanks, Tim. So I think a lot of what we see on the media today, you know, in these past several months, it actually speaks very directly to at least my belief in what we have here in bullet point form. Consistent is a very important word, but I'm going to start with trauma-informed programs. And I have a lot of conversations with a lot of people about trauma-informed programs, and sometimes you hear people say, well, I want to go to a training so that I can be trauma-informed. And that's fantastic. Go to all the trainings you can to be trauma-informed. But for what it's worth from me, having a truly trauma-informed program, it inundates every aspect of every part of your program. It's the day that the kid arrives. It's the training that the staff receive. It's the supervision they receive. It's the care that the staff receive. It's the care that the youth receive. Trauma-informed really has to, for it to be successful, it really has to encompass every aspect of the program that you run. Now, that's why I try to say to everybody, you know, get all the trauma-informed training you can, but it is a facility or an organization's responsibility to take that knowledge and apply it to every facet of the work that they do every day. That's the only way that I've found over the years to truly be trauma-informed. I'll give you a great example. It was a few years ago. I went and visited one of our programs that operates for girls. And I was talking to some of the staff, and they showed me something interesting. The overnight staff had decided that whenever a new resident came into the facility, they didn't start their shift until 11, and the youth were generally sleeping by then. So the overnight staff started writing letters to the kids, and they would leave them in their room for the first night that they were there. And those letters literally brought tears to my eyes. Those letters said to the kids like, hi, my name is so-and-so from all the overnight staff. And the overarching message was, we know this is a new place for you. We're sure it's scary, but we're here to keep you safe. If you need anything, you know, turn your light on, you know, let us know, and we'll get you everything you need to feel safe and secure. And I think that, just that is such a great example of one thing that we can do as juvenile justice organizations to make kids feel safe in the facility they're in. And the other thing I want to touch on, I know I'm probably on time here. I just want to touch very.
You got about a couple minutes.
All right, great. The other thing I want to touch on again quickly is the notion of trauma impacts everybody in your community. So we can spend you know, an unlimited amount of time building a trauma-informed program for kids, but if you fail to include the staff in that process, I fear that your program is going to suffer in its depths of success that it can reach. Our staff, they, as I said earlier, have very difficult jobs. They experience a lot of trauma, and if that trauma isn't dealt with in a meaningful way, it's going to resurface. It's going to re-show itself in different aspects of staff behavior, staff interactions, relationships with kids, which I think we're going to get to a little bit later. So when we say trauma-informed programs, please remember that it's imperative that we're building trauma-informed programs that work for kids and that work for staff as well.
Good. I want to open it up to other members of the panel too, if they want to add anything. And I think, Chuck, you did an amazing job and great example of how that works with the trauma. Because we know, you know, bedtime shift changes tend to be really tough for people, especially with trauma histories, right? So that's a great example. What about the gender and cultural knowledgeable piece of that bullet point? Anybody else on the panel willing to just kind of make a comment to that? I know, Mike, that CJJA has done some amazing things. As I've been a part of your meetings for the last couple of years, you brought in great speakers around that. So Inez, Mike, Penny, anyone want to jump in and just add a little bit on that piece?
I'll jump in.
Okay.
I think on the issue with gender, we have learned in the juvenile justice system that when we are dealing with girls, we need gender responsive programs. And there's a lot of training out there available to folks in terms of what that means. But now we also have the LGBTQ population, which we have to also train our staff, you know, in the needs of that population. But I think with the culturally knowledgeable, with all that's happening right now, you know, in our country, we really have to teach our staff to be more culturally aware, to be culturally competent, to understand that these kids were doing trauma, coming with a backstory, and that sometimes in that backstory, there's discrimination, there's bias, and also we need to look at ourselves and say, what implicit biases do we bring to the table? So I think, you know, when I look at this concept, I think it really goes back to, we train our folks, you know, just like Chuck said, in the trauma stuff and everything else. I think we have to dig a little deeper now with everything that's happening in our country, because our kids are going back to those communities, right, where these things occur. So that's how I see this standard.
Yeah, and Tim, I could comment if that's okay. I think when kids are coming into our program, we need to really listen, not only about their cultural background, their family, their religious beliefs, and so that when they come in the door, we're really listening and understanding them, and even doing safety plans, what things calm you down. And a lot of it can be related to culture and who you talk to and how you are allowed to talk to people, and getting the families and the kids to tell us what is important to them, so we can share that with the staff. I think is a good way to stay gender and culturally knowledgeable with each individual, even within the culture.
That's really excellent. And as I'm going to ask you, if you could kind of expand, because you've talked a couple times and mentioned relationships and the building of relationships. And our next bullet point is developing positive relationships between staff and residents that enhances safety. How can we do that? And what are some ways that you've seen in your experience that's so important?
Okay, so, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Now I can't. We had you.
Charity, can you unmute her?
I've got you, unfortunately.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah,
Yep.
great.
I apologize, I couldn't click it. So absolutely, you know, developing positive relationships is at the core of our work. But it's not as easy when you know, my experience with staff has been, well, you have all this structure, you have all these rules, and we're here to make sure that, you know, the kids are accountable and that they don't break the rules. And so it depends on how you set up and create the environment for folks. And I think that all staff need defined roles in the organization. We're all agents of change, right? We want to make things better for this young person. We want to make sure that our interactions with this young person are positive. And of course, there are going to be times when there are problems. And when I look at New York State, it was sort of like we wrestled with the staff about those issues. So I think like with everything else, we have to train staff. You know, we have to equip them with the tools so that they know, you know, the balance between being authoritative and, you know, being a coach to a young person. And, you know, we had defined several roles, especially for the childcare staff, because they spend the most time with the kids, you know, and we said to them, you know, you're an advocate, you're a mentor, you're a coach, you're going to be responsible for teaching kids skills in groups, you know, you are going to be responsible for doing some, you know, goal setting with them as they go through their goals with their clinicians and part of their support teams. But we saw that with some staff, they still didn't know how to, you know, how to interpret that. So we spent a lot of time clearly defining what that meant to them. And as in our model, it clearly tells you what, you know, clinicians do, what the staff do, but they all have to work together. And I think when there's a crisis, if that young person knows that they have a relationship with someone, most likely you're going to see quick de-escalation of a crisis. When they don't have a relationship, kids tend to act out more. It's me against you, and you want to take something from me. You know, it can become very volatile very quickly. So I think enhancing the skill set of staff in your facilities will definitely impact safety.
Excellent.
And making sure that they are, you know, engaging young people. That it's just not about supervision. You know, they're not guards. That they're part of their task and part of their job is to make sure that they're constantly communicating with young people, that they're interested in their accomplishments and things like that. I have found in our system that there's some staff that never restrain kids. And when you ask them, you know, what's your, you know, and they tell you, they said, no, I'm a talker. I talk to kids and I make sure I know them. So when that crisis comes, I can deal with them.
Excellent. Excellent. Charity, if you can move us to the next slide, please. Thank you. Penny, I'm going to ask you to kind of comment on the next one on behavior presenting risk of harm to physical and emotional safety of individuals in care, as well as the service providers can be minimized and or prevented when responded to with humane and relationship enhancing methods. And I know this is important to you, especially in keeping our caregivers safe, the people that are our staff, making sure that, you know, harm can go both ways. And so if you could touch on that, that'd be great.
Right, I'm so happy to, and I'm just going to kind of build on Inez. Really covered a lot of things. Great, very nice job. Thank you, Inez. And you know, relationships are the most important thing. And when you ask kids what they remember about programs, it's not cognitive behavioral therapy, it's not motivational interviewing, it's not all of the therapy pieces. It's absolutely, I remember how I felt when I was with that person and what you learn. And so this is going to mitigate a lot of the need for physical interventions. And another thing to sort of understand is the importance of the brain and how it reacts to trauma. So when, for example, a child is really acting out and needing physical management, they're hurting themselves, they're hurting others, they're destroying property, it's really critical to know that your prefrontal cortex is not working in that moment. And just for examples I see all the time, the kids are screaming, the staff are holding them down and trying to, and they're yelling, calm down. What's going on, buddy? They mean to be nice. What's going on? Did something bother you earlier? Well, they can't understand one single thing that you're saying. And so it's the relationships and the magical thing called brain mirroring, where if you're calm and you are looking at a person and you remain that way, their brain will mirror your expression. And I'm preaching to the choir, a lot of you do know this, but sometimes when we do forget when we're in a moment and we're helpers and we want to take control and you know, find out what's wrong with them, that is not the time to do it. And the time is when they're calm and you can follow up and have a conversation. And I think humane treatment, I think looking at in the midst of it, while we're having to use physical intervention sometimes when they're in a calmer state, we always want to revisit hope with the kids, because in those moments they just want to give up and they're seeing they don't think they've learned anything and they're in so much trouble. But kind of wrapping up the incident, you know, one of the points would be to revisit hope with the kids, that they can learn and that we're going to learn something from this.
Yeah, there's a connectivity to all these bullet points, as well as hopefully people are seeing that, you know, if we have trauma, you know, that hope starts to be minimized because of the trauma histories. And when I go into a place and people are doing harmful things to me, all that does is recreate, right? And all of a sudden, when I see something that's humane and I have hope, it starts to become hopefully the catalyst that can move us forward. Thank you so much. Mike, I'm going to ask you to tackle the next one. And again, you and I have had a lot of conversations, both while we've talked about code of practice and just in just general conversations around restrictive interventions. And so it says here, service organizations must actively pursue the reduction of the use of restrictive interventions. Could you touch on that, please, in your experience in that as you travel around and see lots of different places?
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, so an awful lot goes into that short sentence right there. And it really is about everything that everybody has just been talking about for the last 30 minutes. There is no one thing that is going to be a magic trigger or magic bullet that's going to reduce restrictive interventions or how we fix the culture and the atmosphere of these facilities. We have to pay attention to everything that's being discussed. And, everything does center around the culture and the atmosphere, the environments that we have the staff and the kids working in. They're gonna mimic, how they feel in those environments, and how staff respond to youth behaviors really does reflect the type of facility that they're in and how they feel about the role that they're in. Building as Inez and Penny and Tim and everybody else has talked about, what that relationship looks like between the staff and the youth is incredibly powerful. And if that, I was thinking as we were going through here, one of the things that I remember thinking about a lot was that historically, these facilities has transformed from adult prison models into what we see today, and they continue to transform into what we really want them to be, and to be facilities that really do make a difference in the lives of kids that are entrusted to our care. But historically, we have trained staff not to build relationships with kids, right? We pushed them away, and we now see how wrong that approach completely is. And the more we can bring staff into this and train them in adolescent development, train them in de-escalation techniques and trauma-informed care, they can then see these kids in a different light. They can build positive relationships. These are the types of things that are really going to have an impact on the types of incidents that occur in these facilities. And by approaching this in this different manner, in this different vision, you're gonna see that these types of interventions that are currently necessary are going to be minimized on their own, because we've changed that relationship. We've changed the dynamics of the culture of the facility in a way that really does have a positive impact on reducing incidents of violence, which is really what this is all about.
Really good. Thank you, Mike. Charity, if you would, let's progress our slide. And Chuck, it's kind of building off of what Mike just said. I'm going to kind of throw this one your way. It says when restrictive interventions are employed, and we know there are times we need to keep people safe from hurting themselves. We need to keep kids safe from hurting another kid or a staff. So we know it's probably going to at some time happen, right? They should only be used to prevent an imminent risk of injury to someone and be discontinued when the risk is diminished and safety is established. Can you kind of touch on that, please, Chuck?
Yeah, I sure can. I think I'll start out with reminding everyone that a staff in the course of their duties can be held accountable for failing to act in a crisis situation, for not doing the things that they need to do, just as they can be held accountable for being overly aggressive, counter-aggressive, for acting too quickly. So there's a window that exists in this line of work, and this is why I think so many people will say this is really difficult work. But there's parameters that exist around the appropriate behaviors of our staff. And so this bullet point really gets to that moment when we can train and we can coach and we can put policies in place, but at 8 o'clock at night on Saturday night, when a staff member's there with a kid, that's when the rubber meets the road for those staff. And they have to make a decision sometimes in the span of 2 or 3 seconds. Is it now time for me to put my hands on this kid to control what's becoming an out of control or has become an out of control situation? Have we reached the point of imminent risk? Is the risk of injury to self or others imminent? And those are the questions that I'm not kidding. In a span of 2 or 3 seconds, somebody has to process, evaluate, and make a decision on. And so, as I said earlier on in this call, this is a very difficult job, but it needs to be done right. I hold fast to that. However much training, however much coaching, however much absorption has to occur for a staff to be able to confidently and comfortably reach those decisions, that's critical. So when I started in this field, I started as a direct care staff, And I will never, ever, ever forget the first time I had to go hands-on with a kid. I had butterflies in my stomach. I think my heart rate was probably like 160. It was a good thing I was young. I don't know if I could handle it today. But it was a nerve-wracking experience. And as time went on and I became more comfortable and confident in the job, I didn't experience those butterflies. I didn't experience that racing heart rate. My heart rate, I'm sure, went up, but it wasn't racing. And so the point that I want to make to everybody here is it's imperative that we all realize and appreciate that anytime you have to put your hands on another human being, it's a big deal. There's so many things that could happen regardless of what your intentions are. When you have to put your hands on another human being, that is a huge deal. It's a huge decision you're about to make, and you need to have done all the preparation work required to know that you're making the right decision in that moment. That takes tons of training. That takes tons of good supervisory work from the people who are overseeing, that staff member. But the real key here for me is when you reach that point and you go past that point, what we don't want our staff ever to do is for this to be normal.
Right.
Unfortunately, I had to do CPR on somebody a few years ago, and when I was done, I almost passed out. I took a knee, and no offense to anybody, I was saying to myself, I hope I never have to do that again. It was a traumatic experience. I thought to myself later in reference to this job that, our medical professionals that do that for a living have to do that frequently, and it becomes normal to them. However, we don't want it to become normal to the point that it's just another day in the office. So whether you're in your first physical intervention or your 500th physical intervention, we have to really train our staff to look at each one of those as its own new experience, where we have to be thoughtful and purposeful in our actions in order to get that situation handled right. And the only thing I'll add, Tim, is it's critical that in the midst of the crisis, in the midst of the intervention, in the midst of all that's going on, our staff have to be exceptionally well trained in always thinking about the welfare and the well-being of that kid in that situation.
Yep.
When I watch a video and I don't see somebody checking a kid constantly looking in on that kid's well-being, I have concerns about it, and those get addressed.
Mike, I'm going to let you piggyback a little bit on what Chuck said, but our next bullet says when restrictive interventions are necessary, they should be done with the least restrictive manner. And that's really where I really think I'd love to see you spend a little bit of time. And what does that mean in our juvenile justice systems? The least restrictive manner possible that can address the presenting dangerous behavior. Because again, that's not, we know historically always been the case, that we've not used our least restrictive. Sometimes we've jumped to our biggest tool. Can you please address that, Mike?
In fact, I think historically we've always taken the most aggressive response in many cases in order to, for whatever reason, whether it was to quell a situation as quickly as possible, so we could justify it and say we didn't want anything to get out of hand or whatever. But those initial responses are incredibly important. And like Chuck was just talking about, anytime a staff member has to put their hands on a youth, no good can come from that. Absolutely no good ever comes from when we have to put hands on a youth. It can be whether it could pose a significant safety risk to the youth or the staff member, and both in some cases both can be true. What we have to do is continue to create environments and cultures to where we're doing everything possible to avoid that. And hands-on or an absolute last resort. Unfortunately, there are situations that occur. We all know we have some kids in the facilities that are very difficult and challenging to manage. But we have to make sure that we're training staff adequately so that they have not just the training knowledge, but they have also developed skills to work with these kids in a different mentality and have the skills to respond differently to those types of incidents. The one thing that I was also thinking about is, and many people have probably heard me talk about this before, but it's just it's a change in the philosophy on how staff respond to behavioral incidents. And one of the biggest things that we did that I've seen the most profound change in, I've seen this occur in other places that have implemented care teams as well, changing our mindset so that we don't have emergency response teams who are coming into an incident with the sheer mindset of they're going to use physical force to diffuse, de-escalate, and resolve a situation. Whereas the care team members come in there with the mentality they're coming in to de-escalate the situation and to do whatever is necessary to gain control, gain compliance of the youth in a way that is least restrictive, and through the course of not having to put hands on, and through just de-escalation and verbal talking to the youth and those types of things. It has the thing that resonated with me the most, and how well that works, it came from kids themselves. And what they had to say was, when the emergency response team was coming, their behaviors escalated. They knew that they were coming in to fight, so they went into a fight mode. So as soon as they showed up, the fight was on, right? Yep. After they got used to the care team response coming, they knew somebody was coming to talk to them. They knew that they were going to help resolve the situation no matter what it was. So by the time they got there, they'd already de-escalated themselves because they knew the situation was going to be resolved and was going to be completely different. So I say all that to say this, that these intervention strategies are complex, but there are ways to manage these situations through better strategy, through better training, through better practices, that we can resolve them without the use of physical interventions.
Excellent, thank you. Charity, if you would, move our slides on. Panelists, just to give you, we got 5 bullet points and 20 minutes, but we want to give a little bit of time for, there's 2 questions I want to make sure we circle back to that are in the chat. So at about the 2-minute mark, I'm just going to put 2 fingers up so you know I'm giving you 2 minutes, and if you can kind of wrap up, that way we can get it through our 5 bullet points in the next 10 to 15 minutes and still give 5 to 10 minutes for people as we do. Penny, I'm going to ask you though, and a lot of these build on each other, right? And we know that when we were putting together the code, when it comes around the restrictive interventions, we wanted to tweeze out some specifics. And so one of the things we spent some time talking about, and would like your input on this, is the restrictive interventions necessary data and debriefing regarding these incidents need the inclusion of restorative practice and focus on preventing further occurrences. So if you could kind of touch on that, please.
Sure. So, and we're going to talk a little bit more about debriefing later, but one of the main points about debriefing is if we can train staff to look at every incident as an opportunity, and it really truly is. And so each time there's an incident or a physical intervention, that when things settle down, we can talk it through with the kids, what was going on with them. And also the staff needed debriefing too, what was going on in their thought process. And then they can come together and they can learn from it. And so we all need to have some sort of restorative practice that allows both parties, be it the 2 youth, or oftentimes it is a youth and a staff, and to find out what was going on. We just had an incident recently where staff just put his hand to guide a child away, and the boy picked up a computer and smashed it on the floor and damaged the whole room. So after, very briefly, we found out that this boy, when anyone touches him, that's a trigger, and the staff had no idea. And so from that point on, they worked it out. They got to know each other a little bit and understand each other's intentions. And then data is important too. And I think PBS does a great job helping us with collecting data. When are things happening? Where are they happening? What time of day with what staff? And so we can manage and develop our programs through data.
Excellent, excellent. You're right. We'll come back to a little bit more of that. Charity, if we could move the slide one more. And I'm going to ask you to take this. Service organizations are obligated to ensure that their staff possess competence in prevention and intervention techniques to address behavior that is dangerous, violent, and causing harm to self and others. So it's that idea of staff competence that we need around the issues that they're dealing with. If you could address that, please.
Sure. I think that I really like to address more the prevention and intervention, and it is about making sure that staff are well trained. And I think everyone has crisis prevention, management programs and things like that in the facilities. But my question would be are those programs competency based? Do you test the staff out to make sure that they do understand what they've been trained in? Do you do role playing where the staff is actually engaged in using whatever the skills are that they've learned in these programs? And in New York State, we have a state-of-the-art training center where they also do simulations with staff. And you have to pass the course. It's not that you're going to get trained and then you're going to go live happily ever after at a facility. You have to pass that course. And I think it's important because staff need to practice those skills. When a young person is angry and they're coming at you and everything, I don't care how you've been trained. I agree with Chuck. It's a very kind of frightening thing. Whenever force comes against force, it means trouble. And, I would agree with both Mike and Chuck in terms of what they said. But I think that a lot more time has to be spent on de-escalation and prevention and not the physical skill training, because if you train staff to be physical, then it becomes a muscle memory kind of thing. And when they're in a crisis, that's how they're going to react. So in New York State, we used to have 2 refreshers on the physical interventions and everything else. And we realized quickly after being trained and going through some of the transformation process that we needed to have 1 refresher on just de-escalation prevention skills, and then the other one on the physical components. And I think that has helped us in our reduction of restraints.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you. Chuck, Charity, if we can move the slide, please. And Chuck, we'll throw this one your way. And you've kind of talked a little bit about this in a couple other comments that you made. Service organizations must provide staff training and supervision that meet all the required legal, ethical, and regulatory standards, and is youth-oriented. I know you touched on that a little bit earlier, in its development and application. If you could kind of just expand on that, please.
Yeah, so I think this ties in a lot with what everybody has said to this point. A couple points that I want to make about this whole, training and supervision. We develop a program that's good for our kids. If I tried to tell somebody on this call how to run their program, it probably wouldn't match with the personalities that exist between your staff, the personalities that exist with your kids, and it would probably fall on its face. So we are all our own best experts when it comes to the type of program that we want to run. But when it comes to training and supervision and meeting all of the standards that are required, I think this happens in all organizations. I've been a juvenile justice guy for life, so I can't speak directly to it, but I believe this to be true. I think in a lot of organizations, and I'm going to say especially for juvenile justice, we might find ourselves in a tendency over the course of many years to say, okay, our staff go to training and they get trained in how to do this, but back on the unit, we all know that this is how we're going to handle this situation. That is unacceptable. That is just bottom line unacceptable, and leadership organizations have to find a way to root that out. And it comes down to like basic things like, do your staff believe in the skills that you're providing them? If they don't, train them more, train them differently, and train them better. And if they still don't, then maybe they don't belong in that organization. But what's critical is this notion of what training is, to me, and no disrespect to training departments around the country, the training part is easy. It's much more of a sterile environment where you set up a curriculum and you say, this is what you do in A, this is what you do in B, this is what you do in C. When people take that back to their program, they say, well, they weren't factoring in that this kid's totally out of control, or they weren't factoring in this kid's mental health issues or anything like that. So the supervisory team might fall prey to those concerns and be a little over empathetic. My message to everybody when it comes to training and supervision is they have to match identically. Get your training in place and make sure that it's being followed 24 hours a day within that program.
Very good. Thanks, Chuck. Penny, you've talked about debriefing, and this is really the idea, the next one, of service organizations must provide ongoing and reoccurring. And I know Inez just kind of talked about this as well, to ensure staff safety and competence that includes debriefing for growth, learning, and maintaining wellness. You could kind of touch base on that, please.
Sure. So I think, the focus of debriefing for growth and learning, I know over the past maybe 10 years or so, whenever there's a physical management, and we do have that happen, we cannot completely eliminate it. The staff's first response is, how much trouble am I in? Was I on the camera? Am I going to be sued? And the kids, at times, they're screaming, I'm going to sue you, and this and that. So the staff's first response is fear. And so setting up a scenario where when there's a physical management, as leadership, the staff know, they're going to have a debrief about it. And the first thing we're going to say is, how are you? How are you doing? Are you okay? And how can we support you? And then once you have that established, you can move into the learning component. But I think it's really critical to be aware of the trauma that staff are experiencing, and then also the maintaining wellness. What I've seen often throughout my career is staff that are traumatized. They're undiagnosed PTSD all the time. And so I really recommend anyone in our field be in therapy themselves, because we need to understand how to have life balance. The more well we are and balanced, the better role models we are for our staff, for each other, and for the kids. So as organizations, we really want to make wellness a key component that we are absolutely supporting, and not just rewarding staff that never go home or they work 10 shifts in a row. Well, let's talk to staff, let's keep them well and have them learning and feel supported.
Excellent. Thank you. Charity, if we could put up the last bullet point that we want to discuss, and then we'll answer some questions. And Mike, I'm going to ask you to kind of tackle this one. The crisis intervention strategies that meet the standards outlined in this code of practice will allow youth and staff to remain safe when there is a risk of serious harm, thus allowing for therapeutic programs and services for youth in our care to continue safety with integrity and dignity. It's kind of a wrap-up bullet point that we put in here. If you could do that for us, that'd be great, sir.
Well, I'll certainly try. I've got pages full of notes of different things that I wanted to talk about. And I think for the most part, we've hit on everything. To me, this particular bullet really does summarize everything that I think we are all talking about and working towards, and that is safer facilities and environments, better outcomes for both staff and the kids that are working and living in those facilities. Penny really just hit on what I really think is a integral part of all this, and that is staff wellness. Making sure we have the right people working in these facilities is critical, but making sure that those staff are properly trained and well to work in these types of environments, I think is the critical piece that I have finally come to realize over the last couple of years. And the more I've thought about this, and I've wished I'd recognized the importance of staff wellness when I was a state agency director, because what I've figured out now is that staff wellness piece really does play an integral role in the incidence of violence within the facilities. How staff respond to the behaviors of the kids dictates a certain level of violence within and of itself, right? If they're working with these kids and building relationships, as we talked about earlier, where they're able to recognize and they're aware of certain types of behaviors with kids, and they can have early interventions in those types of behaviors so that it doesn't result in them having to respond through a course of physical intervention, then you're going to have a much better outcome, right? But that staff wellness component is critical to all of this. So that's, I think we can, I know we're running out of time, Tim, and I want to give you some time to open it up for a couple of questions.
Yeah, so Charity, if you can kind of put us on our Q&A slide, and I'm just going to kind of go into the chat, and we've got 4 questions that we want to kind of address, and then we'll kind of wrap it up, Mike, at the end with you. One of them, this is open to anybody on the panel. Can you point to a jurisdiction that has already adopted these principles successfully and can serve as a model for others to emulate?
I can answer that.
Go ahead.
Okay, so yes, I think there's many jurisdictions in working with CJJA. We get to do meetings like twice a year, and you'll hear about the different programs across the country. You know, I don't want to just highlight New York State, but we have some really good models in New York State. But also, I know in looking at Massachusetts, they have some excellent models as well. I don't want to leave out Pennsylvania. I mean, a lot of the states have really adopted these new standards, some because they had to, right? Some states were being sued. But I think that if you look across the country, there's a lot of different models, a lot of trauma-informed systems of care, a lot of trauma-responsive systems, and you can probably send your request to CJJA, and they'll give you a bunch of different states to look at. But there's a lot of us that are doing really good things. Thank you.
I think the other thing is,
Absolutely. If I can jump in real quick, and you know, I think Inez is on point there. There's a couple others that initially come to my mind as well, to include Oregon and Utah.
Yes.
Done some incredible things there in both those jurisdictions. But I think what's important to recognize is that this is still a transformation in process, right? We're trying to transform how we think of and what these facilities look like, feel like, and act like in order to get better outcomes from youth. So, you know, to be boldly honest, I've seen some really bad facilities, and they do exist. They are out there, and we have a long way to go. But I do believe that this code of practice is a good step in that direction. If we could get facilities and jurisdictions to adopt everything we've talked about and to help transform those facilities into utilizing this vast array of all these different topics and elements that we've talked about today, that we'll start to see those transformations take place.
excellent. Second question is, are there any gender responsive trainings that you would recommend for juvenile service training staff to attend so that they can effectively develop training for direct care staff? So again, the question around gender responsiveness, is there any programs out there that you would recommend?
I mean, I can speak to that. CJJA, I usually do a training, gender responsive training for them, and it's all the most current research, Rothschild, and, you know, all of the work with gender responsive, and it can turn a program around almost immediately within a month. If you understand girls and how they work and how we need to work with them differently, they can be the most dangerous, but it's just how we understand them and how we work with them. So I can recommend that. And Stephanie Covington has a lot of good work relating to gender responsive care.
There's also a circles training, and it's out of California, I believe.
Yeah, that's a good one.
They do an excellent job in terms of the relational components of girls and how, you know, the actual societal issues that impact girls. And it's actually a group curriculum. You can buy it. You have to be trained by this organization. And I find that has been pretty effective as well.
It's a great one.
Yeah.
Good. The next two questions are kind of similar, and so I'm going to kind of combine them and put them out there. And is there any research out there that you suggest guides, recommends, founded what is least restrictive manner technique? The second question is, are there specific techniques and moves you recommend for least restrictive manner?
I think de-escalation, and I think we know what not to do, but does anyone, can anyone speak to that better than probably I could?
Yeah, I think this is Chuck. I think it's a tricky question. So I think I'll say this. If I was an organization that did not yet have one, I would go out and seek and study and research all of the options available to me regarding, you know, what's going to work best for me when it comes to de-escalation, and then, you know, heaven forbid, the actual physical intervention that is required from time to time. But going out and finding those, and then in finding those, you then find what within those parameters, what might be the least restrictive, what might be the most restrictive, and everything in between. But I'm going to say again, I encourage you to shop around. In Pennsylvania, for me personally, I've been using the same system for many years, but I don't go 2 years without looking at a new one. I always want to see what's out there. I always want to see what's new, and I always want to see if you know, somebody has improved on something. So I think when you find that, you'll find parameters around least restrictive.
I think
And
the other
please,
question
a nationally recognized model.
Yeah.
And I think that's it, Penny, right? I think that there's some questions as a group that actually, you know, that's my role as a senior vice president, but, you know, there's some questions I always encourage to ask because we don't believe we own the market on it. It's got to be a right culture fit, right?
Right.
But ask those organizations to actually show you what those look like when you get into your restricted practices. If they're hiding something from you, that's not really the relationship you want with somebody. And we all have videos that we can get on and we can share and show what it looks like when it looks like at techniques. The other thing I always think is, how were they developed? You know, when you start to talk about today, when we talk about Mike mentioned, a lot of stuff is coming off of these adult correction models. You know, what have they done to develop something that's going to be more fit for the group that you're working with in youth? And how is it developed and how is it tested? Do they have any biomechanical backing of why they do what they do? Or is it because that's what we learned in a Taekwondo class when I was a kid? So I think that's some of it as well, is making sure that it is been, it's got some legs to it that have been tested and true. Mike, you want to take it?
Yeah, I was just gonna touch on that same point. I mean, jurisdictions, facilities, you need to look at the system that you have, the training that you're providing, your staff, and look back and see where did that come from? How was it developed? What types of evidence is it based upon? And if you're using a homegrown, adult-based, law enforcement style physical intervention program, you should probably take a more in-depth look at that and look outside, look for programs that had been around for years that are really focused on juvenile intervention strategies and techniques, and have a heavy first focus on de-escalation before it ever gets to the physical intervention piece. And if you can find a program that has those types of modalities and trainings embedded into it, you're going to be in a much better place. You're going to find yourself that you're able to reduce those types of physical intervention incidents from happening.
Charity, if you would move to the last slide, and Mike, I'm just going to let you keep going and say our goodbyes and thank yous. And I'm just going to say thank you for allowing me the time to moderate, and to the panel members today for all they have contributed in all their years of experience. So Mike, you can kind of wrap us up.
Thank you, Tim, and thanks to everyone who was on the panel today. You all did an amazing job, very knowledgeable and experienced, and I really do see this us doing this again on an update to this program, or maybe some more in-depth conversation around certain of the standards or something of that nature. So this was just the initial overview. So maybe we'll have some discussion on what another round of a webinar or two might look like on this particular topic, because I really do think it is one of the most pressing, most important topics that we can be talking about right now, particularly given some of the situations that have occurred recently in regards to physical intervention strategies and techniques that have been used outside in the community. And we never want to see anything like that happen to the youth in our facilities either. So this is an extremely important topic, and one that I'm really happy that Tim and all of our membership at CJJA have had some foresight on, and we're working on this topic to begin with. So as you exit out of the webinar, you should see a survey pop up. It'll be a very short survey. I please encourage everybody there to take this quick survey so that we can get some feedback. There should be, if you go to our website, cjja.net, you should be able to find a recording of this webinar. Will be posted on there. But if you were registered for the webinar, you'll also receive a link to the recording via email shortly. And just continue to look forward to providing more webinars on this and other various topics to everyone sometime soon. So for all those who did participate, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to focus in on this topic and to join our webinar. So thank you all very much, and I hope you have a good day. good rest of the week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Stay safe.